says it all. After 18 days, President Hosni Mubarak has resigned. It was left in the end to Vice President Omar Suleiman to make that brief statement on Egyptian state television. He said that President Mubarak has given up his post as president and has asked the armed forces to be in charge of the country's affairs. It's 12 minutes past 16 hours GMT. This is Al Jazeera on quite an historic day. The protesters there chanting now in Tahrir Square, the people have brought down the regime. History in the making. Let's get a view now from Ayman Mokheldin, our correspondent, who's been there throughout the protests in central Cairo. Ayman, President Mubarak has gone.
Adrian, after nearly 30 years in office, nearly 11,000 days, on January 25th, thousands of Egyptians frustrated by what they've described as tyrannical rule, oppressed for so many years, with nothing more than just strong determination and their willpower, really took to the streets all across the country in unprecedented protests to speak and to be heard. And tonight, after all of these weeks of frustrations, of violence, of intimidation, of many of them giving up their lives, the sacrifice to be heard, today the people of Egypt undoubtedly have been heard, not only by their president, but by the people all around the world. And you can hear it for yourself in Liberation Square. It is truly a historic moment, not only for every Egyptian, not only for Tunisians who inspired what happened here, but indeed for Arabs all around the region, for people all around the world that have been seeking their freedom for so many years.
Ayman, let's just go over the last couple of hours. We began to get word that Hosni Mubarak had left the capital for Sharm el-Sheikh, and then news that we were going to get a presidential statement on Egyptian television. It was a statement that lasted all of what, 20, 30 seconds, no more than that. And it was left to the Vice President Omar Suleiman to do it.
Indeed, you know, when we look back at the past 24 hours, so much confusion, so many different reports coming out about what is taking place, trying to read in between the lines from the statements that came out of the military, that communique, when the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces convened, what did that mean? Today we have that answer, because as you said, it didn't take long for it to become apparent what was happening behind the scenes. You can look back certainly with a great degree of retrospect and conclude that perhaps what was happening over the past 24 hours was indeed that transfer of authority from the president to the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. The Vice President making the statements. You know, one of the most ominous signs that we started looking into that things were changing was Egyptian state media. In the past 24 hours, the tone of their coverage changed. We were seeing things that we had never seen before in Egyptian media. The Vice President coming out today in those brief statements and essentially now saying that the military will be running the country. Certainly the end of one chapter, but the beginning of a much more important chapter now for the people and for the military.
Yeah, before we start talking about what happens next, Ayman, let's talk about the last 24 hours then. How do we explain what happened then? President Hosni Mubarak came out less than 24 hours ago and made that speech which so disappointed the people there in Tahrir Square, and insisted that he was staying in his post until September. And now this. What happened in the last 18, 20 hours?
Well, you know, Adrian, when the history books are written about what happened in these critical hours, it's going to have to answer a lot of questions. The timing of so many of these statements, the moves that happened behind the scenes. Why did the Army communique come out first before the president's statement? Could this delay have been something that was pre-planned to throw people off, to create a sense of confusion among ordinary Egyptians, to test them, to test their resolve? Was it a blunder on the part of the government that in the order of these statements? Was this perhaps even a coup of some sorts? We still don't know. Now, it's very important not to jump to conclusions, but yes, we know that the vice president has announced President Mubarak has stepped down and handed the powers to the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. But the question really is, how in the past 24 hours did the politics behind it all unfold? And it's still going to be a very long time before we start hearing from all of these players that made today happen.
Ayman, you're the first Egyptian I've spoken to since this happened. A personal question for you, a moment. You've been there throughout this, all of the 18 days. I want you to stop being impartial for a moment, because your reporting has been exemplary all the way through. Give me your personal feeling as to what you're seeing there now in Cairo tonight.
Well, you know, Adrian, as somebody who spent a lot of time growing up here in Egypt, and you've seen the sacrifices that have been made by so many people over the years, ordinary Egyptians who had been complaining for a better quality of life, for those who, you know, for decades indeed tried to make that dream a reality, the sacrifices that so many people have made, particularly in the last years. For years, the Egyptian people have been criticized for being somewhat apathetic, for being somewhat disenfranchised, not taking care or not taking their own destiny in their hands. I think today, you know, as an Egyptian, someone born here, there's no doubt there's a great deal of emotion that runs through every Egyptian, whether they're in the country or abroad. And I think we've seen that emotion come out from people all around the world, really. So today you can probably hear the sounds of celebrations. We've been hearing some celebratory gunfire. I can assure you that every Egyptian, whether they're stepping in Egyptian soil right now or if they're abroad, they're feeling a great sense of pride, because for the first time in a long time, perhaps even in the modern history of this country, Egyptians' voice has been heard by their government. And this is what is so unique about this. It has changed the dynamic for every Egyptian who have felt a sense of empowerment. They have now, for the first time really, at least in my generation, and I can speak at least even in my parents' generation, their voices have been heard. And for the first time, they're going to take at least some kind of control in paving the way forward for their future. The questions really are going to be very challenging, but tonight it's taking a sense of pride in that the people that have been dormant for so long have indeed risen and demanded a better future for themselves. So it is a very emotional night. I can tell you that as an Egyptian who was born here, there's no doubt that I never thought that I would actually live to see a day like this, because you hear about Egypt in the past from your parents and grandparents, the sacrifices that so many Egyptians have made to live abroad and immigrate, seeing that better future. Tonight they are realizing that the people here in this country have gotten one step closer to making that future better.
Ayman, many thanks indeed. Ayman Mokhieldin there, live in Cairo. Let's just remind you, if you've just joined us, this is an historic day. After 18 days of protests, President Mubarak of Egypt has resigned. Vice President Omar Suleiman came on national television just a short while ago and said that Mubarak has given up his post as president and has asked the armed forces to be in charge of the country's affairs. Tahrir Square erupted in celebration. Listen to that noise. That's the situation in Liberation Square, Tahrir Square in central Cairo. Let's take you now to the presidential palace. Al Jazeera's Rabia Rage is there. What's happening there, Rabia?
Adrian, the sense of euphoria here is simply indescribable. I am trying gather the words, the sentences to describe to you the sentiment here, but it's simply indescribable. The moment the announcement was made, people were crying, some people fell to their knees, praying immediately on the floor. The tears are everywhere, the smiles, the dances. You would think that people were actually hitting drums, but they were simply stomping the asphalt with their own feet. Homemade fireworks immediately from the balconies, people setting on fire aerosol cans, music, chanting. It's just simply indescribable. 30 years of rule summed up in a 30-second statement. It's just simply unbelievable. I'm 30 years old, Adrian. I was born the week President Mubarak assumed power. All my years of life, I have known one president, and I can tell you, I have never seen this sentiment on the streets of Egypt, not even when Egypt won for the third time in a row the African Cup of Nations. Nothing like that. The sentiment is simply indescribable. Outside the presidential palace, people immediately started marching, saying they're going to join the other protesters in Tahrir Square.
Rabia, many thanks indeed. Al Jazeera's Rabia Ragid there, another of our correspondents, Egyptian-born, as she was saying, exemplary reporting, impartial all the way through this crisis in Egypt. Until this moment, I think we can forgive her telling us how she really feels there about what's happened in Egypt today. She's known no other president. She was born in the week that Hosni Mubarak came to power. That's compelling stuff. Let's bring in Hoda Abdulhamid, who is overlooking that massive celebration in Tahrir Square. Hoda, I know you can't hear me. Tell us what it was like the moment people realized that Mubarak had gone.
I think it's undescribable. I mean, I cannot convey better than the sound of joy and excitement that is emanating from the square here, 12 floors below me. It is just an incredible scene, and wherever you look, people are dancing, flags are waving, and I think it's a historic moment that actually injected a huge amount of pride and dignity into the Egyptian people, a feeling they had not had for such a long time. That's the feeling that pushed them to actually start all this, to decide that's enough. We want to be proud in our country. We want our rights, and I think they got it. Earlier, I was speaking to some of the people here on the square, and they said they were angry, they were patient, and they said, well, if Tunis, such a small country, took 23 days, then it will take us much longer, and it took them actually a few days less than the Tunisian people. But I don't think I can really convey to you the excitement that is on the square at the moment.
All right, Hoda, many thanks. Hoda Abdulhamid, again, someone who's been there right the way through all of this since it began some 18 days ago. Let's speak now to Al Jazeera's Shireen Tadros, who's actually down there among it all in Liberation Square. Shireen. Well, it's obviously so noisy that Shireen can't hear me.
I can hear you.
Shireen, tell us what it's like.
It's absolutely insane. I've never seen anything like this. People are fainting. They're carrying them up through the crowds. They're spraying water on people just to try and keep people up because of the just complete excitement. Really words fail me to describe what is going on here. The news started filtering through just as the prayers, the evening prayers, were coming to an end. So we had these hundreds of people on the floor praying, and suddenly they all rose up at the same time and put their hands in the air, and they said, God is great. And now they're shouting and screaming, saying the people have brought the regime down. The chants that we've heard in the past week saying the people want the regime to come down, now it's happened, and it all happened here in the epicenter of this protest, Liberation Square. It started here. 3 weeks of this uprising to bring down the 30-year regime, and people here